So I'm Emily, I work at Big Society Capital. I'm the Senior Communications and Engagement Officer there. And what that means is I work with charities and social enterprises, and my role involves me chatting to them about social investment and making sure that tools and resources are really accessible around social investment. And it also involves me running events like this one today. My role also involves me working on the Get Informed project, and Get Informed, for those of you who don't know, is a resource hub that offers practical support and guidance to help board members of charities and social enterprises understand the opportunities and the risks of social investment. It's been a real pleasure to work with Community Action Suffolk and Voluntary Norfolk over the past few months. We ran a really successful Let's Talk Good Finance event together back in July. And the idea for this event today, as part of Trustees Week, came from the work that both of the organisations have undertaken around making access to information and resources on social investment easier for the social sector within their localities, but also in turn for trustees like yourself all across the UK. And Sarah, who's on the call today from Community Action Suffolk, has written a fantastic blog that is live on the Get Informed website now. And her blog reflects on the experience that she has as a social investment officer, the conversations that she's been having with charities and social enterprises and their trustees on social investment, and her key learnings. And I'll share that blog with you in the chat if you'd like to do some further reading. But it's just a really interesting insight into some of the conversations that are happening around social investment at the moment. So before I hand over to Lucy, I am just going to take you quickly through the agenda for today's session. So I'm just going to share my screen. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Lucy in just a moment, and she's going to give you a very warm welcome from Voluntary Norfolk and from Community Action Suffolk. Then we'll hear from Melanie Mills, who joins from Big Society Capital. And Mel was the architect of the Get Informed campaign. She's going to chat to us a little bit more about Get Informed, but also about social investment, importantly from a risk perspective. We've got Lisa Hilder as well, just before the comfort break, going to chat to us. Lisa joins us from Preston Road Women's Centre, and she's going to talk to us about her perspective and being a charity trustee of an organisation that's taken on social investment in a number of ways to make a huge difference to the lives of women and of children living in Hull. We're then going to have a quick comfort break, very important, get a cup of tea or coffee and come back all refreshed for Carolyn Sims, who we're delighted to have joining us from Charity Bank, where she's the Director of Lending. And Carolyn is going to talk to us about expectations of trustees from a social investor perspective. And finally, we'll finish off with a virtual thank you, which I'm not going to ruin the surprise. We'll do that at the end, a virtual thank you to all trustees before some optional networking at the end of this session. Before I hand over to Lucy, I just wanted to say that if you have any questions as we work through this session, please do ask. You can ask by either just coming off mute and asking a question. That's absolutely fine. We really encourage discussion. We really want people to ask questions and to engage in the conversation. This is very much a session that is for you to ask questions. Or if you don't want to ask a question, of course, you can pop something into the chat, and we'd really like you to do that as well. No question is a stupid question. Please ask away, and there are lots of people on this call who can help you and answer any questions that you might have. Finally, this session is being recorded today, so please send me a message if just to kind of let me know if you're not comfortable with that, or if you want to just pop yourself off video if you don't want to be recorded. That's absolutely fine, but just to let you know, this is being recorded and it will go up onto our YouTube channel and out on social media today. So thank you very much. I'm delighted to hand over to Lucy Hogg, Head of Infrastructure at Voluntary Norfolk. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here today and to welcome you all to this Good Finance event. As Emily has said, the event sort of came about really as a result of the earlier event that we ran earlier in the year with Big Society Capital. And I think through that, we've recognised really how important the role of the trustee is around the sort of social investment agenda. So we all know that you're volunteers, that you do an awful amount for charities locally, and it's fabulous to see such a good number of you here today from across Norfolk and Suffolk. So today's event really is an opportunity to share with you some of the developments and new thinking around social finance. So I think with funding from traditional sources being more difficult to access, being able to look to social finance as another part of that sort of funding mix, part of the sort of trustee toolkit is really, really important. And I think, you know, during these challenging times, being able to sort of find different ways of bringing finance into charities is absolutely critical. And I think what you'll hear as we go through the event is that social finance can often be a really good way to sort of unlock innovation and more creativity within the organisation, in some respects giving you a bit more freedom than you might have had with sort of the more traditional grant funding model. So we recognise that your role is absolutely key. I'm really, really pleased to be here to sort of celebrate the work that you all do, and thank you really for being here today. So if there's any sort of questions that you have that we can't deal with today, do get in touch with Amelia after the event and we can follow up with you one-to-one. And yeah, just I hope it's a good event for you, and please, you know, do give us your feedback afterwards. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass over to Mel. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. That's great. And yeah, to absolutely echo, we're delighted to be here and to celebrate the amazing work of trustees. I just wanted to quickly check, Jim, you've got your hand up. Did you have a question to ask? No, cool. Just saying hello, that's absolutely fine. Can happen. Great. Fantastic. So I am delighted to welcome Mel. I work alongside Mel at Big Society Capital. She is the Senior Director of Social Sector Engagement, and Mel leads on our engagement strategy, working with charities and social enterprises to improve access to resources and tools on social investment. As I mentioned just before, Mel created the Get Informed campaign a couple of years ago with some of the team, and she has a wealth of experience in talking to trustees and non-exec directors on the role that social investment can play and ensuring that they have the tools and resources to make well-informed decisions and choices. I'm just going to pass over to Mel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emily. Oh, that always worries me when I've got a wealth of experience. That means that I probably should know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to do my best. And that's always a challenge then for you in the audience, trying to ask us some questions to which we might not know the answers. We'll be honest if we don't. It's lovely to be here in Trustees Week. Not least, I've posted in the chat that I am a trustee myself. I think many of us who work in the social sector can't help but help ourselves, trying to get involved in many different things. So what does it mean, social sector engagement director? For it's a long mouthful, isn't it, for a title? Essentially my work is about trying to translate how social investment could potentially work for social enterprises and charities. So I'm going to very quickly tell you, I'm not a social investor myself. Before I worked for Big Society Capital, I ran a social enterprise for 5 years, so I can honestly say that I've sat on the other side of the fence. And one of the things that I noticed is that there was a lot of misconception about social investment. I think not helped often by, in the early days, government talking about it like it would be a replacement for grant, which it isn't. And it is always quite blunt and honest that it is money that you have to repay with interest. What I am absolutely passionate about is ensuring that social enterprises and charities have enough information that they can make informed decisions about whether social investment is the right tool for them, because sometimes it can be, and sometimes it can open up doors and avenues to create more impact. So that leads me to the creation of Get Informed, Social Investment for Boards. Why did we bring this about? Actually, it came about from talking to lots of different people, to talking to chief execs and to finance directors and to trustees who said, you know, this worries us. Essentially, the trustees are taking this risk on themselves. You know, is it morally right to borrow money? Is taking on debt bad? Is that debt is bad debt bad? Or is debt bad? Those are two different questions. And what we thought would be really, really important was, instead of the professionals, if you like, which, you know, I'd count organisations of social investors, people like Carolyn, who do this for a living, what people told us was they really wanted to hear peer stories. They wanted to hear from other trustees. So at no time has Get Informed been a sales campaign. It's not about trying to sell social investment. It's simply about trying to share stories and experience so that individual trustees and then for trustee boards can become better informed. Hence, it does what it says on the tin. So Get Informed, Social Investment for Boards. Can you move to the next slide for me, please? You'd be glad to know I've only got a couple of slides. So the campaign itself is a set of free resources designed to help social enterprises and charities and trustees particularly, this is who it's designed for, to navigate this space. So it comes with a set of a range of free videos that you can show to your board at any time, some great case studies and stories of organisations that have been on this journey, and it's very much a reflection of the warts and all. So, you know, what happens when things go wrong, what were the biggest challenges, and not trying to gloss over some of those things. Just move on again for me, please. Okay, and I always thought when we were putting Get Informed together, this was a really important statement. This actually came from the Director of Policy and Communications at the Charity Commission. And I think it's one of the things that certainly something that I've held on to as a trustee myself. So as with any other aspect of charity strategy, trustees should feel confident to make bold and even radical decisions. So I would be interested to know how many of you feel empowered as trustees that your organisation does just that, make bold and radical decisions. I actually think many trustee boards do this. The question is whether we apply that essentially to social investment as well. The caveat, of course, comes as long as they comply with their duties and responsibilities in reaching the decision and they know they have the information they need. And it is that very last bit of the statement, having the information they need, that we hope Get Informed can help with. So I think what we're going to do now, I think if I'm at the right place in my slides, is we're going to show you a very short 2-minute video. One, because you've probably heard enough from me already. Unfortunately, you probably have to put up with me again at some point. But we're going to actually share some of those peer reflections with you. Oh, look out, you might see somebody familiar on here, and I'm not talking about me.
Can be difficult to achieve, and certainly finding money to pilot untested ideas is very challenging.
There's less public sector funding around, and boards will be expected to be more creative and more innovative to carry on delivering what they want to deliver.
And how do you fund new ideas? How do you create innovation?
So many organisations, particularly in the third sector that work with disadvantaged people, have great ideas about what they want to do, but are not able to access finance to put those ideas in place. Social investors enable them to do that.
Social investment is one way of funding new buildings, new projects, and if they don't consider it and they dismiss it out of hand, then they could be not achieving something that would really make a difference.
If you don't look at it, then you're kind of selling your beneficiaries slightly short. How strong is the executive? How well are you working together as an organisation? What is your vision for the organisation? And will what you're proposing help to deliver that vision? That's really, really important.
The board needs to be very confident about its own governance and its own service model, that it can actually secure finance going forward in order to repay that investment.
If we really want to harness the potential of innovation in the voluntary sector, we must use social investment as flexibly as possible, and we'd like to be part of finding solutions to that.
Lovely, thank you, Emily. That's great. So yes, I'm hoping you spotted Lisa right at the very beginning there, and she's going to talk in a lot more detail about the journey of the organisation that she's been part of. So the question that I often get asked is, is it worth it? You heard from some of the speakers there, we call them the faces of our campaign, so all trustees or chairs or sitting on boards themselves. And the question I get asked from trustee boards is it worth it now? It's tough to take on repayable finance. There's going to be this thing we call due diligence. So and I'm sure Carolyn's probably more informed to be able to talk to you about that, but that's essentially going through the process of trying to understand whether lending your organisation money is the right thing to do. And the thing I always come back to around is it worth it is only the board can make that decision. But essentially, social investment should be seen as a tool to create more impact or to sustain impact. And so that's probably the thing that will give you the answer as to whether it's worth it. I thought that I would reflect a little bit on this Alice's quote before we move off to any questions, and I'd be really keen to hear and to see either in the chat, or you can ask a question about any organisations that have either considered social investment, have taken social investment, decided not to, are currently exploring, or actually haven't thought about it. And I'd be really keen as the session goes on to find out if any of the things that we've shared perhaps giving you a different perspective. So Alice, who was a former chair of Scope, who did raise investment, I really love this quote. So a key part of a board's role is to ensure the organisation delivers the best outcomes for its beneficiaries. And it's important that boards explore how social investment might enable them to do that well. I think Alice actually said in the video that you could essentially be slightly selling your organisation short if at least don't explore it and understand if it's right for you. And what I'm looking forward to a bit more is perhaps giving you some more practical examples of how that's worked from somebody like Roger, who was featured in the video. They're a traditional boat festival. I probably wouldn't have thought I'd be able to use that as an example of an organisation that had taken social investment perhaps 5 years ago when I started at Big Society Capital. But essentially, this traditional boat festival has been going for 30 years, and they've run out of places to go to for grant funding. And essentially what they did was they took over a very disused, abandoned bothy and turned it into a hostel. So they essentially run accommodation, and it's the income from that that helps to cross-subsidise and pay for the traditional boat festival. That's quite an unusual form of using social investment, but I think it just shows how far we've come. So I think that's it from me on slides. I can already see a question coming in, which I'm definitely going to have a look at. And I'm sure as well that perhaps Carolyn and Lisa will also be able to come back to this one perhaps in their time. But do feel free to ask any questions. So what's the typical interest rate for social finance? What kind of repayment terms? Initial repayment holiday, length of term, and presumably no personal guarantees from trustees. Goodness me, Stuart, that's a big one, isn't there? Lots in there. Okay, there isn't a one size fits all, because borrowing money depends on the risk of the investment. So any terms and conditions are relative to risk, and that will be the difference between, say, at one end helping something that's relatively a startup or a very early part and is unsecured, to essentially borrowing against an asset, which is more like a mortgage payment. One of the things that we're working on for Good Finance actually at the moment is a cost of capital calculator, which will help you understand more about the amount of money you're looking to borrow, the interest rate, any associated fees, how long you're borrowing it over, and to have a better understanding. But I can see that Carolyn's taken her mute off, so I didn't know whether, Carolyn, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, just to give a live example. So at Charity Bank, our pricing probably starts at just over 2.5% for a large secured deal, rising to 4.5%. These are rates above Bank of England base rate, which is currently 0.1%. But as Mel says, it really does depend on the nature of the proposition. The loans that we provide tend to be very similar to your conventional residential mortgage. So we lend up to 25 years. You can have an interest-free period at the outset if it's necessary. You can make early repayments at any time without penalty. The majority of, or the average life of a loan at Charity Bank is only about 8 or 9 years, even though most of the loans we make are for either 20 or 25 years. I must say, at the moment, Charity Bank is a secured lender, hence the pricing, the 2.5 to sort of 4.5%. The unsecured lending is more expensive. If you were to approach some of this sort of specialist unsecured lenders in the sector, probably you'd be looking at something 6.5% upwards above Bank of England base rate.
Yeah, exactly, Carolyn. I was going to say that. I mean, I tend to say that in the secured lending, it's somewhere between 2 to 5. And then, as Carolyn said, 6 upwards, and it could be, you know, 6 to single middle digits, depending on the type of lender. What I would say is that the cost of finance has definitely come down, and there are certainly many more options. So some of the top tips we hear from many of our speakers at our Let's Talk Good Finance are: find the right partner. That's the first thing they say. Actually, before they talk about interest rate, they say find the investor that is most closely aligned with your values, because this is going to be a long-term arrangement. That's the number one thing they say. Then they say shop around. So they say find which investors do the sort of thing you're looking at, because I think that's probably one of the greatest misconceptions. So there are over 50 different lenders and funds listed on Good Finance. Not all social investors do the same thing. So it's really important to actually work out what type of money you need to borrow to do what kind of thing. And then either ourselves, Good Finance can help you find them, and social investors. If you go to a social investor and they don't think actually that's in their lending, Carolyn would be great at pointing you to somebody else that potentially could help. So what you don't see in the social investment sector is this level of commercial competition. So we are quite used to working together. I know Charity Bank often collaborate with other lenders to put deals together. We'll come back to the personal guarantees from trustees. I'll probably get asked a question about how social is social investment, but I'm going to save that one if that's okay, and I will come back to that towards the end. Is anybody got any other questions that they want to answer now? I won't forget about the last bit of Stuart's question. Feel free to keep popping them in the chat and we'll come back to them. I would urge you to check out Get Informed. All of those videos, there's a suite of 8 actually, all featured from boards positions. That again, they're accessible to you. They've had well over 1,000 views, and we created them so that you could show them to your board at any time. There's also other resources that you may well find interesting. Okay, I think that's me, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mel, do you mind if I just come in before I
go for it, Lisa.
Just in terms of different terms and repayment terms and so on, just to say that you might want to choose different products and different partners for different proposals and services that you might want to fund. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the services at Preston Road Women's Centre in a moment, but just to say that we use a range of social investment from different partners and using different products, and the interest rates go from just above 2% above base up to between 6 and 7%. But interestingly, that particular deal doesn't have a fixed interest rate, and it has other terms which are beneficial in terms of the
growth in the value of the assets that the lending is secured against. So as Mel was alluding to, it's very much a pick and mix, and choosing the right type of social investment and the right partner for what you want to do is really the key.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that reflection, Lisa. And it's exactly the same ilk of all the discussions that we've had with people. Choosing that relationship that's going to last for a number of years is extremely important. So thank you for that. It's actually your slot on the agenda, Lisa, so thank you for for coming neatly in there. That's fantastic. So just for everyone's benefit, if you don't know Lisa, you've already seen her on video and she's already come up here. So if you don't know who Lisa is a trustee at Preston Road Women's Centre, and she's worked alongside the Get Informed campaign since its inception. She's one of the faces of the campaign, and she brings a wealth of experience to this conversation around social investment, as she's already demonstrated. And like she said, she's used within Preston Road Women's Centre different types of social investment to scale and to grow services for women and for children. In a time when rising demand for support services has really been impacted adversely by public funding cuts. So it's fantastic to have you here, Lisa. Thank you very much for joining us. And I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I am a trustee for Preston Road Women's Centre, which is a charity and a company limited by guarantee based in Hull. And hopefully you can see the slides there. We've been going for 20 years this year, so firmly rooted in the community and firmly rooted in Hull. And as you can see on the strapline there, we're about creating sustainable solutions for women and children in Hull. And if we could just look at the next slide. Now then, anybody been on this hamster wheel with me? I don't know if you want to give a little wave or a little nod. I can't see you, but I'm sure this is a familiar image and a familiar feeling for lots of people. Shall we pop onto the next slide, Emily? Yes, so these are the things, or these are the services that we provide at Preston Road Women's Centre. And we refer to it as our integrated service model, looking at that journey that women take and supporting them from crisis intervention to recovery. So one of our core services is around specialist domestic abuse support. And we get some grant and contract funding. So we have a local authority contract around housing related support. We have one post funded by Comic Relief. And this year we've accessed some short-term emergency COVID-19 funding. So a mixture there, but it's also supported from our social investment related activity, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. It's linked to our portfolio of safe dispersed accommodation. So at the moment we have 210 properties that are dispersed across the city of Hull, all different sizes, from 1 beds right up to 5 beds. We've got one 5-bed property, mostly 2s and 3s. And that's the main thing that is funded through our social investment funding. So it's helped us to buy all of those properties. We lease some of them as well. And the rental income that we're able to charge for those supported properties enables us to cover all of the costs associated with running the properties, repairs, maintenance, insurance, etc., and the staffing associated, so that we can provide some really good support to women in those properties. And we've grown to a size now where we can also accommodate women who have no recourse to public funds. We've developed a business model and a cash flow model that enables us to do that. We have our own in-house family law firm, Affordable Justice, which we opened in 2016. And that is a social enterprise as well as a registered charity. So we do charge service users for the legal services that they get from us. But the target cohort that we're aiming at are women who are no longer eligible for legal aid as a result of welfare reform. So if they weren't able to access our affordably priced services, then they would be stuck because they can't afford high street prices either. So typically our charges are less than a third of what women would pay on the high street. And we do things like non-molestation orders, child proceedings, divorce and separation. We have an on-site nursery in our women's centre, a few fee-paying parents, but we have a contract with the local authority to deliver placements. You'll probably be familiar with the 15-hour and 30-hour placements that kids are entitled to. And we work with some very vulnerable kids who come with their mums who've been subjected to domestic abuse. We offer accredited training. So we're an accredited centre with the National Open College Network. We have a volunteering programme that was funded through the Big Lottery Fund for a number of years, but is now funded through our unrestricted funding. We have a charity shop on site. As I'm sure many people here will relate to, that's been a little bit stop-start this year for obvious reasons. And again, it's very affordably priced. We're based in an inner city estate. So really the idea behind the shop is to provide good quality second-hand goods onto the estate rather than make a lot of money. And we have a young women's participation and empowerment service, which is funded through Children in Need. So a whole range of services under one roof with a whole range of different ways in which they're funded, including social investment. So it's very much a tool in our toolkit rather than what we rely on solely. So I'll just pause there for a moment and see if there are any initial questions about any of the services. Anybody? No? Okay, that's fine. So what were we trying to do with social investment? As I'm sure will be familiar to lots of people here, we've seen a 10% growth in demand over the last few years as a steady increase. And we saw a particular spike in April and July this year as a result of lockdown. Women's services, as with many different services in the voluntary sector, have been decimated nationally as a result of austerity and public funding cuts. And we're all trying to make ends meet as charity trustees to enable our services to continue. And the light bulb moment came when we realised that we were trying to use short-term revenue funding to address long-term social need. and that revenue funding running around the hamster wheel, applying for grants that last maybe 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, was never going to properly tackle those long-term social problems that we really want to get underneath and start to make a difference with. So we started to think, well, how can we change that? How can we extend our planning horizon and look at different ways to generate income? And for us, it was a short hop in terms of the thinking to move to looking at asset-backed finance and properties where we could house women in good quality accommodation in accessible locations, close to public transport routes, close to schools, close to GP practices, that gave them a safe place from which to begin their recovery journey. So that's what led us really to exploring social investment. Can we have the next slide, please, Emily? So why is it important? Why is social investment important? And why, as trustees, do you need to at least be thinking about it? Even if it turns out not to be the right thing for you, could you incorporate it as a tool in your toolkit? So firstly, it's an alternative to grant and contract funding. And it provides a mechanism through which you can extend your planning horizon to a different type of time frame. So because our social investment is largely property based, the time frame that we work on is anything between 15 and 25 years. And if you start to think about your organization in those chunks of time, what could you do in 15 years that you can't do in 5 years or 3 years or 1 year? And it does start to shape your thinking very differently in terms of how you design and deliver your funding. Sorry, your services. I suppose the other thing really, and I've put it as the last bullet point on here, but it's linked to the first one, is that it gives you greater autonomy. So you'll be able to deliver social impact that satisfies the requirements of social investment, but you won't be crammed into very restrictive grant criteria or contract compliance requirements that really do cramp your style in terms of what you want to deliver and how you want to deliver it. So that autonomy over service development and service delivery is absolutely liberating. It's a wonderful place to be because you can be so responsive to the needs that come through the door, and not have to dance to somebody else's tune. Even if you like the tune and you like the funder, having that freedom to choose for yourself is wonderful. As I mentioned, most of our social investment is asset backed, so it's based on property. Effectively, it's, although we use different products, it's mortgage based investment. And it helps us to grow our balance sheet. So our balance sheet is very healthy, and that helps with financial sustainability. One of the worries that we had when we started out with this is that whether traditional grant funders would be less interested in us if we had a strong balance sheet and lots of assets on it. But in actual fact, those worries didn't come to fruition, and grant funders like the fact that we are financially sustainable because they know that we're not going to go pop in 2 years' time, and that the investment they're making in terms of the grants they give us will be put to good use and is likely to have a lasting impact because the organisation will still be around. One of the other really important elements of social investment is that it's a direct route to scaling up. So we wouldn't be able to be in the position of having 200 properties and delivering all of that benefit and all of those safe homes to women who really need them had we not used social investment. So we have had some capital grants over the years, but relatively speaking, they're quite small and they've only enabled us to buy a few properties, which of course is still great, but there's a big difference in the amount of social impact and the amount of benefit you can deliver as an organisation with 5 properties as opposed to 50 properties. And investment, social investment, enables you to go faster, be bigger, do more. So I can see there have been some questions in the chat. If I pause for a moment and have a look at those, let me just.
Yeah, there's been a few questions. I don't know if anybody would like to pose the question to Lisa. I see Rob, I think you're off mute if you would like to ask your question about
Yeah, I'll
fire away.
Please do.
Okay. I suppose there are 2 points wrapped up in that. So we deliver in voluntary Norfolk services to individuals. And the outcomes for those individuals really fall back into the realm of DWP, the local authority, and health and social care providers. And what we found a great deal of difficulty with is that those organisations don't want to pay any outcome fee. So what that means is when we've looked at social investment, there's not an obvious route for us to get funding coming back into the organisation to fund the outcomes, which would then enable us to repay the investor. Have you come across that as an issue, or because you're primarily into property issues, that might not be significant for you?
So you're a little bit muffled, Rob, but if I can just play back what I think I've heard.
By all means,
yeah. So in terms of bringing income into your organisation, what I think I heard was your current funding mechanism isn't outcome based. Is that right?
So the current funding mechanism we've got for most of our work is actually based on a contract basis with local authorities.
Yeah.
We have looked at getting in and working with local authorities and DWP to enable us to work with social investment, but the outcome payments to repay the investors would have to be coming from, for example, DWP paying us for the number of people we get into work.
Yeah. I see.
And also health services paying us for the number of people that we move on or help with their health issues. We found a significant reluctance for DWP and for the local authorities to do that. So what that means is we struggle to repay the investors. So we haven't moved into this in a significant scale.
Yeah. So essentially what you're talking about is something like a social impact bond, where you deliver outcomes that the DWP or perhaps the local authority then pays for.
Yeah.
And I think there are some tricky issues with that kind of approach, because even if you can demonstrate those sorts of outcomes, commissioners had their fingers burnt in the 90s and in the noughties with private finance initiatives. And sometimes that kind of approach feels like a PFI, and commissioners are a little bit nervous of taking something like that on, and feel like they might be paying for something twice or paying for something that would happen anyway. So I think it's a tricky sell, with your local commissioners, and either they like that kind of approach or they don't. And my experience is it very much comes down to the individual commissioners that you're dealing with and whether they're prepared to be bold themselves in funding in that kind of mechanism.
Yeah. Which at the moment they are significantly not.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah.
To be fair, we do have one social investment that we are running to do with the carers program that Lucy might want to talk about, that actually was transferred from a contract basis into the social investment. So Lucy might want to pick up on that. The other point I wanted to raise was the point at the bottom, which was helps to increase the autonomy over service development.
Yeah.
So in terms of the investor, or should we call him the commissioner, what role do they have in looking at the shape of the services that are delivered, or do they focus primarily on just the outcomes and the fact that they will get their payments repaid?
Yeah, the latter. So they're interested in, for example, the investors that we work with, they're interested in the outcomes that we can deliver with and for women, and they're interested in managing risk in terms of finance.
Yeah.
But the refreshing thing is that they rely on us as being the experts in what we do. So if we tell them that actually the best way to do it is X, and we can show a clear rationale for that, then they say, have at it, go on and do it. So, and one of the other nice things is that can evolve over time. So as long as we're meeting the basic parameters of repaying the finance and meeting social impact, then they're very flexible in terms of precisely how we do that. And so in that respect, they're not commissioners. So they don't try to micromanage how we operate, and that's lovely.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just gonna pop in here. Sorry, it's really interesting conversation. I'm just mindful that we've got lots of other questions in the chat, and Rob, more than happy to discuss offline with you as well. I'm just conscious of time, and we've got some questions from Julian. Thank you very much, from Julian as well. So Julian is asking about your diversity of services, Lisa. A couple of questions. So in terms of who is paying for the core rents on the properties, and how does that link to housing benefit? And then have you had to become a registered provider for social housing? I'm not sure if Julian is here, but I think that encapsulates most of his question, if you just want to.
Yeah, so the rental income from all of our properties is based on housing benefit. Some of our tenants work and they pay their own rents, but the vast majority claim housing benefit. So that's where the income comes from. In terms of registered provider status, we decided to register our trading arm as a registered provider in 2013, which was 6 years into operating properties. And as you're probably aware, Julian, there are some advantages of registering as a provider, and it centres around it's much easier to have the rent paid directly to the organisation if you're a registered provider. It's easier to negotiate enhanced housing benefit with the local authority because they can claim it all back from DWP, although it's not a prerequisite. Charities can still claim that enhanced housing benefit. But one of the doors that it opened for us when we did register our trading arm as a registered provider was access to the Affordable Homes Grant Programme, which is the main capital investment programme run by the Department of Housing that builds new homes. And in actual fact, we're about to break ground on our first residential development next month, as a result of the monies we've been able to negotiate with Homes England, and we've got 2 more in the pipeline. So not only are we purchasing properties, we're now building properties, and that has all grown from our foray into social investment. So hopefully that answers your question.
And that's great, Lisa. Thank you very much. It's fascinating hearing your development, and very impressive to see the growth in the property portfolio. Because one of the things that we've been looking at is how you can get housing benefit to cover those kind of repayment costs, and interest in the balance of how you have to fight for enhanced housing benefit to provide the extra kind of support for the individuals, their care, counselling, etc. And trying to see how successful you guys have been. So thank you very much for your time and contribution.
No, happy to discuss it further if you want to offline.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. I've just got one question that Mel would like to pose to you, Lisa, and so I'll let Mel chat to you.
So Lisa, I just wanted to take you back a little bit here, because I'm thinking of all the trustees that are on the call, and also the question that get asked a lot, which is, you know, what happens if other trustees are really concerned about the risk and, you know, perhaps don't feel that that's aligned to the values. So I just wanted you perhaps take you back to some of the early days when you considered this trustee board, and how that progressed. Perhaps you'd like to share that.
Okay, yeah. So it's fair to say that when we initially looked at our first social investment, not all trustees were convinced or enthusiastic. We had lengthy discussions. I'm sure you've all been in those board meetings that seems to have gone on for a decade, and went backwards and forwards over it. I think ultimately, obviously, we did decide to go forward, but it was a long and tortuous process. However, as soon as it became obvious that the business modelling was sound, and that the outcomes that we were achieving that were so much better for women started to come through, everybody just relaxed. And it took us 18 months from start to finish to get to the point of signing our first contract around social investment. It took us 3 months to do the second. And the second one was just under £1 million worth of investment. We did the modelling, we discussed it with the board, and when it came to it, it went through on the nod. So there was absolutely a journey that we went through in terms of people getting comfortable with doing this. But as I say, I think the two things that helped to move on the board's thinking were that reassurance as the money started to come in, and it was clear that we were going to be able to make the repayments, and the outcomes and the benefit that we were able to deliver as a result.
Thank you, Lisa. That's great.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm just mindful of the time, and I wanted to ask if anyone had any final questions for Lisa. And Lisa, I don't know if you had any more content to go through. I know that you had a packed slide deck, but we're more than happy to share that with all the attendees today. You did a very good job at including everything within that document. I know you haven't got time to work through all of that, but I think that's a really, really insightful discussion. I'm sure there'll be lots more questions that come off the back of that. So just quickly scanning to see any final questions for Lisa, or any final reflections from you, Lisa, in terms of your experience as well.
Well, Emily, if you just want to put up the slide with the little ant, that probably says it all. if you've got the presentation in front of you.
Do. Here we go. There we go.
Yeah. You can lift more than your own body weight when you really take advantage of social investment, and it really can be done. Our journey's been 20 years. I don't want to give you the impression that all of this has happened overnight. It certainly hasn't, but it has been a long-term journey of building a foundation for the future. And I've no doubt that what we've been able to do in our term as trustees will set the organisation up for really good service delivery for the next generation. And you can do that too.
Thank you. What a wonderfully positive end to your discussion, and thank you so much for that. It's been really, really useful. And again, so many of the reflections and the discussion there really demonstrate your passion for the sector and just demonstrate what can be achieved when you're thinking about long-term sustainability. I really liked when you were talking about what can you achieve if you think about your organisation in 20 years' time. We often think about what we can achieve within a year or within, you know, a year or two, but thinking about that in the grandest ways unlocked so much potential for you. So thank you so much for that. Hamsters and ants, I love it. Very good, positive mental images. So thank you so much for your time, Lisa. That's really, really appreciated. And we'll be sharing Lisa's slides and contact information, if that's okay with you, Lisa, if anyone's got any further questions with
that's
all
fine.
Attendees. Thank you so much.
Happy to pick up a conversation with anybody outside.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Right, so moving on very swiftly, I have eaten into your comfort break a little bit. So what we're going to do is just take 5 minutes to go and get yourself a cup of tea, quick comfort break, and then come back for about 12:10, where we'll be hearing from Carolyn Sims, who is the Director of Lending at Charity Bank. So thank you very much. I'll be around in the comfort break, as will some of the team here. So if you want to ask any other questions or just have a quick chat, and that's absolutely fine as well. Otherwise, we'll see you back here in about 5 minutes. I actually run a really small women's charity myself in my spare time, Lisa. So I was listening intently to that, and yeah, completely feel that in terms of our grant fundings, usually about a year long, and it keeps us in this trap of not really being able to grow. So the hamster wheel certainly felt relevant within that sense as well. I mean, we are an extremely, extremely small organisation, but yeah, constantly at the kind of beck and call of funders that don't really allow us to do very much on a consistent basis. So we are having conversations about that, but especially so the charities based in Scotland, and getting long-term funding is a real challenge. So
yeah, I mean mostly funders are well-meaning, but I've framed it in the sense of that it's a very controlling relationship, which obviously is very relevant for us as a domestic abuse charity. That the funder wants to control your actions, your budget spend. Some of them want receipts for every single last penny. Anybody who's ever had ESF money will know the pain of that. So breaking out of that controlling relationship was a wonderful metaphor for us. In terms of our finances, and empowering ourselves not to be reliant in that way is something that really aligns with the work that we do.
Absolutely, yeah, that's really interesting in terms of what a powerful metaphor for your services, but also just for the way that you're able to develop as well. It's really interesting.
And Lisa, just remind me, what was the value of the first loan you ever took? What was the value of the first one?
Well, it was some blended finance from Future Builders England, which was 720,035 quid, something like that.
Okay.
And 500,000 of it was loan.
So it's quite a big first foray. Okay, I'll cover that as well later, because I've got a lovely example. By complete coincidence, it's a charity bank example, but it's at completely the opposite end of the scale. But I won't say it in case Carolyn does. I don't steal any thunder.
Yeah, I'm just going to give it a couple, well, one more minute, and then we'll get going as well. Always just good to give people a chance to get a bit of air, tea, that kind of thing.
Hello, Julian again. Just as a quick question while we're waiting for other people, is there anywhere that you can point me that's got a list of good case studies of social impact bonds for both just generally in the UK as other lessons learned, but also relating potentially to social enterprises as well?
Yes, so I posted actually in the chat. We host as part of Good Finance. We actually host the Social Impact Bond Toolkit, Providers Toolkit. So this was actually created by charities and social enterprises who had delivered on social impact bonds. So it's sort of their guide, their walkthrough. That said, reinforcing what Lisa said previously to Rob's question, a social impact bond, you know, I wouldn't start there as a way of thinking about social investment unless you have got an investor that is engaged. But we do have a really good list of case studies, and we just published a recent one from Skill Mill, which is national, is working with young people. It's around training and education, and it's a justice linked example, but there are examples of social prescribing, of children on the edge of care. So there are, you know, a wide range. So I would start there. But if there's something specific that you'd like a case study of, do let me know, and I'll actually try and post that one in. But you will find a really quite comprehensive list of social impact bond case studies there. I'll also post the one other place that you'll find some as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Just to add to that as well, on the Skill Mill, if you're interested and would like to hear more about David Parks, who is the managing director there, we've got a really good podcast that's just gone live on our Good Finance SoundCloud channel, so I can pop that in there as well. He just goes into a lot more detail in terms of his journey and setting up his social impact bond as well. So that's another option for you if you like something to listen to as well, Julian. So I'll pop that in the chat.
Brilliant, much appreciated. Thank you.
No problem. Fantastic. Okay, so we will get going again. I hope everyone is feeling refueled and is looking forward to hearing from Carolyn, the last speaker in our session today. So last but by no means least, Carolyn Sims is the Director of Lending at Charity Bank, and it's been brilliant to have Carolyn along today to talk about her role at Charity Bank and explain what it is that lenders look for when they're investing and expectations of trustees. And Carolyn is also a trustee herself, so brings a huge range of knowledge, experience and insight that I'm sure will be really useful to you as trustees and to help you evaluate risk, but also just to find out more about what it is that social investors are looking for to help you on your social investment journey. So I'll hand over to Carolyn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily, and good afternoon, everybody. As Emily has said, I'm the director. So shall I just wait? Yeah, thank you. I'm the Director of Lending at Charity Bank. I've been at Charity Bank for about 15 years now, having previously had a career in the city, but I was fortunate enough to be able to make the change and work with organisations that really do deliver social good. I'm also a trustee of 4 different charities, and I'm a treasurer of 2 of those charities. So it's quite time consuming. But I must say that all 4 charities that I'm involved with do not borrow money. Okay, next slide, please. So just a bit about Charity Bank, in case there are people on the call that haven't heard about Charity Bank. We're a bank that wants to fund social good. So we are owned by charities and social purpose organisations. All of our shareholders are charitable trusts and foundations. Big Society Capital is our largest shareholder. And what motivates these investors is around delivering social good. And that's what we are there to do. So we use their capital, and we also use savings from people and organisations who are kind enough to invest or save money with us to be able to deliver social good. So we take deposits from people, it can be individuals, trusts, foundations, corporates, charities, SMEs. We're not proud. As long as the money is legitimate, we'll take money from anyone who's willing to place money on deposit with us. And a lot of our depositors have been on a very long journey with us. They've invested in us since day one, really, and they follow the progress of Charity Bank. We also give all of our savers the chance every now and again to come out and see some of the projects that we are funding, and they really like it because they feel then they can connect to what their money is being used for. We're the only bank in the UK to have a social enterprise mark. We have been top of the Good Consumer Guide, most ethical bank in the UK for the last 10 or 15 years. So we're clearly doing something right. And as the last bullet point says, there's no discretionary bonus system for staff, no hard sales targets. It's about doing what's right for organisations. And sometimes when we look at lending propositions, we decide that perhaps we're not the right people to fund them, and we will put them in touch with other organisations we feel can better support them. We can talk to some of our shareholders and other organisations we know about bringing in some grant money if we think organisations are going to become too indebted. It is all about doing the right thing. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our mission is to support your mission. We've made loans of over £250 million to charities and social enterprises. We spend a lot of time meeting and building relationships with our borrowers. We don't provide day-to-day banking services, so our relationship with our borrowers is very important to us. We believe that because we are purely focused on the social sector, we really understand the pressures that you are under. The majority of my team are also charitable trustees, so we see it from both sides of the fence. And most recently, we've been very actively involved in the Resilience and Recovery Loan Fund, trying to get money into the sector to organisations that really have been very adversely affected by COVID-19. And in fact, we've been the largest producer of business for our RRLF. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry, Emily. Oh yes, sorry, you've done it. Thank you. So first and foremost, and I'm going to come on and talk about what lenders look for, but what's most important to us is social impact. So although we look at the credit risk of a transaction, first and foremost, we will ask you questions about what your impact is, who you are supporting, who your beneficiaries are, how you think a loan will increase the support to your beneficiaries, will you increase services, will you expand your reach? It is what is most important to us. I think when you approach a lot of banks, and particularly the high street banks, the first thing they will ask you about is, well, can you afford to repay the loan? What security can you offer? Whereas the first question we will ask is, what good are you doing? And how do you measure that good? And we have adapted our own system internally so that we can measure the impact that we have, and we regularly produce a social impact report. Next slide, please. So in terms of what lenders look for, as I've already said, first and foremost, we're looking for the social impact. And the one thing, if I've got any criticism of the sector, I think it's sometimes that they don't sell themselves well enough. Not that many of our borrowers actually produce social impact reports, and it's quite hard sometimes to extract data as well. And I think this is really important, particularly at a time when there is very large demand, particularly from charitable trusts and foundations for their funds. And the one way in which you can set yourselves aside from other people is having good social impact data. And I think you as trustees, it's something that you could take back to your organisations and look at and see whether you can actually produce social impact reports. They can be very basic, but I think they really are very important. Also really important for us is buy-in from all. And when I say buy-in from all, I mean that everybody, it's not that just the executive that's driving the need to borrow money, that the trustees are supportive as well. In the past, we've worked very hard with organisations to provide loan facilities, and then it gets to the organisation's board, and the board of trustees decide really it is something they are not comfortable with. So as part of our due diligence process, we want to meet with some of the trustee board just to make sure that they are all on board with taking out a loan, that they understand the implications and ramifications about taking on borrowing for the organisation. I think it's worth bearing in mind that a number of organisations that we lend to don't have staff, and so it is purely the trustee board that we are dealing with. And a good example of that is almshouses. We are very active in the almshouse sector, and very few have paid members of staff. So we want buy-in, and as I say, we would expect to meet at least some of the trustees, not all. Occasionally we're asked to go and present to a board of trustees to talk about the loan facility, to talk more about Charity Bank, to try and get them comfortable with the concept of borrowing, because we do appreciate that, you know, no one wants to take on debt unless they absolutely have to, but used in the right way, it is a really good tool. So what else are we looking for as a lender? Well, we want to make sure there is demand for the purpose that you're seeking the funding. So if you're looking to build some more housing units, a good example is a community land trust. Have you done enough market research in the area? Is there a demand for the units that you're going to buy, and the type of units you're going to either buy or deliver? So we want to be absolutely sure that you've done all your research and due diligence. A bit of a way down the line, we want evidence that you can afford the loan. So you need to have done your own work to ensure that you are generating enough income to be able to afford to repay the loan. The last thing any lender would want to do is have to foreclose on the security. In other words, call an event of default and seek immediate repayment of the loan. And I don't want to alarm you. In all the time of being of Charity Bank, we have only ever had to foreclose on 2 loans, and that was because the trustees just gave up. I think they felt they were out of their depth and they walked away. In all of our time of being, we have written off less than 0.5% of all of the lending that we have done. So clearly there are a lot of organisations out there that are very successful and they are repaying their loans. We look at the governance. This is really, really important to us, that the board of trustees are very engaged, that they've got the right skills and the right experience. So if you are going to undertake a development, we would expect to see someone who sits on the board that has development experience or project management experience. We would expect to see all the normal skills, such as a lawyer, someone with financial experience, preferably a qualified accountant. If you're delivering young people's services, someone who works in the young people's services area as a profession. So it's about having a balance of skills on the board. Have you recently done a skills audit of your trustee board? Are you confident that you do have the right skills necessary? And if you're moving into new areas of work, do trustees then have the experience needed to deliver on new areas of work? We also look closely at the provision of financial information, appreciating that in most cases boards will have their own finance subcommittees, but is financial information regularly being prepared and shared with the board? It's quite surprising how many organisations we talk to that only produce annual accounts. If you don't produce quarterly accounts, how do you know how your organisation is doing? If you produce a budget but you don't produce quarterly management accounts, how can you track your performance? How do you know whether you've got money to spend? So we would expect, as I say, quarterly management accounts in most cases. Faith and almshouses probably are an exception, but making sure that the trustee board is aware of what's going on within the organisation from a financial performance perspective. Security, a long way down the list. Do you have security that you can offer? And when I talk about security, I mean bricks and mortar. Do you own a building that you can provide as security? Or is the purpose for the loan to buy a building that you can provide as security? If you don't have any security, it doesn't mean that you can't borrow money, but what it does probably mean is that you will be limited in terms of the social lenders that you can approach. You will have to borrow on what we call an unsecured basis, and the debt will cost you a bit more than it would if it was on a secured basis, because obviously the lender is taking greater risk. We will also be looking for a risk assessment or register as well, and I suspect most of you on the call do actually produce these now. It's really important. It's important for us to understand what you think the risks of your organisation are and how you can mitigate against those risks. And one of the questions that we frequently ask chairs, treasurers and chief executives is what keeps them awake at night? What do they think is the biggest risk facing their organisation? The other thing that we do talk to trustee boards in particular about is the legal format of an organisation. Are you incorporated or are you unincorporated? If you borrow as an unincorporated entity, the trustees carry personal liability. And I know Mel talked or mentioned earlier about trustee guarantees. We do not take guarantees from trustees. We think it's morally wrong. As a trustee myself, I would certainly not be prepared to guarantee any of the organisations that I'm on the board of, not because I don't believe in what they do and I don't believe in supporting them. I just don't think it is right. I think trustees do enough without having to give their personal guarantees. And that's why we are concerned when organisations borrow as an unincorporated entity, because effectively you are on the hook, and it is the trustees' personal names and addresses that will appear on a loan agreement. So if any of you are on the call and you're thinking about borrowing and you are unincorporated, I would suggest that you have a discussion. Sometimes, very rare instances, organisations decide that they do want to borrow as an unincorporated entity. And in that instance, we want to be sure that all of the trustees have taken appropriate advice and they do understand the ramifications of what they're doing. Next slide, please, Emily. So how can you as trustees evaluate the risk of taking out loan finance? Well, I think there's a number of things that you need to take into account. You need to be provided with, or you need to undertake some sort of risk analysis that is pertinent to your own organisation. Is it the right thing for you to do? Have you weighed up all the pros and cons? Does by taking out further funding, is it going to increase the ability for you to deliver on your charitable purpose? The options assessment, what happens if you don't take out additional funding or funding to increase your services or expand your reach? What happens then to the organisation? Is doing nothing an option? You need to look at affordability. Are you as a board of trustees comfortable that you can afford to repay the loan? And you will be required, if you are a registered charity, you are required to take what is called Section 124 advice, which looks at whether the borrowing is necessary, whether it's affordable, and whether the terms are fair and reasonable. So as a charity, if you're going to take out debt, you're going to charge any of your assets, then you need to take this advice, and it can be given to you either by your accountant or lawyer. If you've got staff and obviously they will provide projections to you, evidencing the ability that you can afford to repay the loan, you should be challenging those income projections. Are they realistic? Not so much now, but in the past, we'll look at organisations and perhaps historically they have generated £10,000 or £20,000 a year in donations. They produce a forecast for us evidencing how they can afford to repay the loan. And all of a sudden they're going to generate £100,000 a year in donations. There is a gap, affordability gap, and they're plugging it. And so we will challenge the projections. Are they realistic when compared with past performance? And this is something as a board of trustees that you should be doing as well. And it ties in with assessment of sustainability. Do you think that the forecasts you're being given ensure the organisation will remain sustainable? And the professional opinion, this goes back to Section 124 advice, and also take advice from other people, from your accountant, from your lawyer, or talk to other people that have actually taken out debt in the past. Next slide, please, Emily. So things you should be considering, and a lot of this is probably relevant to chief executives, but I think it's a useful tool for you and also for organisations, as I've said, where they don't have paid permanent staff. So always ask a lender for indicative terms early on. Do a cost benefit analysis. Make sure that it is the best way, that taking out debt is the best way for you to deliver on your project. You need to consider legal expenses as well as the cost of the loan. It's not just about what a banker's or lender's arrangement fee may be, but if they're taking security, there will be costs in putting that security in place. I've already touched on affordability. Are you confident that you can afford the repayments? Do sensitivity testing. If you've got paid staff, they should be doing this for you. The what if analysis. Bank of England base rate is at a historic low, and it has been at a historic low for a considerable length of time. But what happens if interest rates rise? Supposing base rate moved to 2 or 3%, could you afford to still meet the loan repayments? What happens if you've always operated at 100% occupancy? Supposing you have 5% voids, what does that do to your income? Can you still afford to meet your repayments? What happens if you've got an investment property and you've perhaps got a commercial tenant in there and they can't afford to pay anymore and there's a reduction in your income? Can you still afford to meet the loan repayments? Read the small print in any loan agreement, and I'm sure Lisa will agree with me here. Make sure that you understand what you're signing up to, that you can comply with all of the terms, in particular financial covenants, and there should be financial covenants within a loan agreement, or KPIs, key performance indicators, just that you are sure what it is you have to do, what you have to meet and when. And things like provision of financial information. Most lenders or investors will ask for some form of information. Is what they're asking for what you produce already, and can you produce it in the timescales that they're looking for? Have you recognised all of the costs? This goes back to things like the cost of putting a loan in place. So legal costs, you'll probably have to get a valuation. So you just need to bear all of this in mind. Next slide, please, Emily. So other bits about what you should look for. Interest rate. So it's not just about the rate, but it's also about the type and the term. So a lot of lenders will quote you what we call a margin over Bank of England base rate. Other lenders may quote you a margin over what's called LIBOR. Bank of England base rate is far more stable than LIBOR. So you just need to understand the differences, and LIBOR tends to track higher than Bank of England base rate. So for example, a lender that says to you, we will lend you money at 2.5% above base rate, compared to a lender who says we'll lend at 2.25 over LIBOR, actually the base rate loan may be better for you. Look at the term as well, and look at whether there are break clauses in the term. So whilst most lenders, and we are the same, will lend for up to 10, 15, 20, 25 years, once you get to the longer term loans, there's often a break or review clause in there to just make sure you understand what is it there. I've already talked about fees. Security, understand what a lender is looking for, what is expected of you. Commitment, when do you become obligated? Is it when you actually sign on the line? Default, what happens when things go wrong? I would suggest that you don't just rely on your solicitor to review a loan agreement and say, yes, it's fine. You need to look at the loan agreement and understand the impact that it could have on you as an organisation. So default, what are the events of default? And what happens, what rights does a lender have if things do go wrong? I touched on covenants. These are really important because there will be covenants. Can you comply with them? You know, are you comfortable that you'll be able to comply with them on an ongoing basis? Are they overly onerous? And don't feel that just because it's something a lender said you've got to do, that you can't go back and challenge. I mean, a really good example of this is we do an awful lot of lending in the faith-based sector, and we have a debt servicing covenant. For the faith-based organisations, we set it at 1x cover, because otherwise the congregations are effectively being asked to give additional money just to satisfy our lending covenant, and we don't feel it's right. So don't just take what a lender says as face value, you know, do challenge. Early repayment penalties, I've touched on this earlier. Whilst the majority of the loans that Charity Bank make are of 20-25 years duration, the average life of a loan at Charity Bank is about 8 years. And this is because the majority of our lenders, the majority of our borrowers prepay their loans. They don't want the loans outstanding. They will continue to fundraise, they may get a legacy, they may have a good year trading wise, and they may want to make a lump sum reduction. Can you do so without incurring any costs? Is the lender going to insist that you change or you move your transactional banking? So particularly the main high street banks, if they're going to make a loan to you, they'll want to see your day-to-day banking as well. So just check to see whether you're obligated to move your banking. Next slide, please, Emily. Then finally, in terms of dealing with lenders, I've talked a bit about what we expect of you, but to give you a bit of help in dealing with lenders, I would suggest that you make initial contact at a very early stage. Don't leave it until you're a long way down the line. You're a month away from signing a JCT contract with a builder. Have early stage discussions. It's far better, and then you will quickly get an idea about whether what you're looking to do is feasible or not. I would suggest contact a social lender. They've got far better understanding of the social sector and may be more willing to lend. I also believe that when things get difficult, social lenders are more likely to support you. In the last recession, the majority of high street banks withdrew from lending, whereas a lot of the social banks continue to lend. Even now with COVID-19 and lockdown, we've heard stories about high street banks saying, oh, well, we're not going to lend at the moment, we need to consider our position, or okay, we'll lend, but we're very nervous about taking security and how much we'll lend against a building's value, whereas the social banks tend to be more consistent. Don't fear rejection. Banks have different criteria. So just because one bank says no, other banks may say yes. When Charity Bank was originally established, it would only lend to organisations who could actually provide a letter of rejection from their own bank. That was a criteria to lend. So, you know, banks do have different approaches. Find out about timescales. Putting debt in place can take a lot longer than you think it may do. And Lisa, I think your example of how long it took to put your initial loan in place is a really good one. If there seems to be a delay, contact the lender, ask them what's going on. And then finally, if you get to the point where you've got a loan offer, get someone independent to read that loan offer for you. I'm conscious I'm running over time. I think I've just about got to the end of it, Emily. Have I got time to take questions if there are any?
Yes, I think it'd be good actually if anyone has any questions, we could ask Carolyn now. We've probably got time for one or two questions, if anybody would like to ask or come back on any of Carolyn's really interesting and really important points there. So there's nothing in the chat, but more than happy if anybody would like to come off mute and ask anything. No, that's absolutely fine. I think you've covered so much there, Carolyn, but I'll let you just chat to this final slide as well. I think this is a really interesting example. So I'll let you chat to this before we just wrap up.
Yeah, okay. So we do an awful lot of work in the YMCA sector. We really like YMCA organisations because of the very high social impact that they deliver. And I think this just really says it all. We work with them to fund a new building. And they really like the fact that we understood the sector and that they see us as a partner rather than just someone that's making a loan available to them. And that's what an awful lot of our borrowers say, that we work with them in partnership rather than just here's some money, get on and do whatever you want to do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And that's such again, another really positive framing and discussion around that relationship that you have in terms of really getting to know the organisations that you are investing in. So thank you very much, Carolyn. There's no questions in the chat, but please don't be shy if you have any questions, and please do feel free to ask them. Doesn't look like anyone's got their hand up. Oh, have we got something popped up in the chat? Very clear, exactly, very clear information there. Thank you so much. Mel, I wasn't sure if you had wanted to ask a quick question there or reflect.
Just reflect three things I think that came from this is, first of all, one is about the question about risk, which I think both Carolyn and Lisa have given some great examples of. So the thing that I would ask all trustees to think about is, you know, what does risk mean? What's the greatest risk that you've ever taken. And I do remember somebody saying this, and I think it might actually have been Lisa, saying to me that, you know, essentially we'll often hear trustee boards say, oh, well, it's too much risk to take on a loan. But essentially, if all your contracts are only for 12 months, what's the risk beyond that? I think trustee boards deal with risk every day. What we're essentially saying to you that is borrowing money is just another type of risk. So definitely one that you should at least consider. Maybe it will give you some options. The other piece that I was going to talk about is size of investment. So I asked Lisa in the break what the first investment, the size of the first investment was, and interestingly enough, although it's quite a while ago from Future Builders, it was blended finance. It was 720,000, so quite big investment. $500,000 of that was loan and 220,000 was grant. So this is what we call blended finance when it comes to part grant and part loan. But at the opposite end, I remember making an award, as I say, completely incidentally, that it was a charity bank investee. And I remember the reason that I picked it, it was in Yorkshire, was because it was a perfect example of what Carolyn has said. It was an organisation with no employees who were only previously turning over £13,000 a year. But essentially they were building some bungalows so that they could fulfil their charitable mission, which was to provide affordable accommodation for older and younger people to stay in the village in which they lived. And they're an organisation in Hudswell. So there we go, you know, from an organisation that were very small to an organisation that is much bigger. Social investment can work across those spectrums. And actually the first time average lending is only around about £50,000 in terms of people's need. And my last bit is the question I said at the beginning, which is how social is social investment? We would never tell you to not consider mainstream investment from a mainstream bank. It might be a little bit cheaper, and you need to balance that against what you're trying to achieve. But I thought Carolyn's point was excellent, that we hear this so much, that borrowing money from a social investor is about so much more than money. This is a partnership that will span both the time of your investment, and actually I've heard from many people actually beyond when the time the money has repaid. And so you know, I think the answer to this question about how social investment has really been seen during the pandemic, and Carolyn's examples of, you know, just how many times charity bank have actually had to foreclose. A social investor won't lend you the money if they don't think it's the right thing to do. No social investor wants to see a social enterprise or charity go out of business, and they will also do everything within their power. I've known people to have extensions of loan periods, capital and interest repayment holidays, help to recruit new members of the board, and all sorts of things to try and put the charity or social enterprise in the best place. So that's probably going to be my final parting shot on how social is social investment.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you for that. And thank you once again to Carolyn and to Lisa for that great discussion. Really, really rich discussion there. And I know that the attendees will take away a lot from both of your perspectives there. So thank you so much for that. Just to recap as well, that we will be sending out slides from both Lisa and from Carolyn. I'm sure that a lot of you will like to sit and absorb a little bit more the great advice and the great experience that we've learned today. Just before we have a little bit of time for chat, I wanted to test a virtual thank you. So I'm just going to also spotlight Lisa as well. So you can clap if you want to, or you can just wave your hands. I'm just going to share with you my virtual thank you to all trustees who work so hard. And this is my way of saying thank you to you in a Zoom fashion. There's no sound, so don't worry about me sharing that. But I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you very much. That's the only way that I can really say thank you at the moment to you all. But thank you all so much for coming along to the session today. And thank you for your time and your participation. We had scheduled in some time for optional networking. So if anybody would like to stay and to ask questions and to discuss anything, please feel free to do that. We have about 50 minutes left. So yeah, please feel free to stick around and do some networking with us, ask questions. But thank you once again to our speakers today, Lucy, to Mel, to Lisa, and to Carolyn. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for being here.
Big thank you to Emily for facilitating, and of course a massive thank you to each and every person that's on this call that volunteers their time as a trustee. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.